Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar, I Don't Want to Die in Prison, a public health conversation with Dr. Abdul El Sayed and people who survived living in Michigan's prisons before and during COVID-19. My name is Daniel Jones. I am the project coordinator for the Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration. I am also a consultant for American Friends Service Committee Criminal Justice Program. This event is co-sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee, the Carceral State Project, the Prison Creative Arts Project, and Safe and Just Michigan. Special thanks to Safe and Just Michigan for their help with the tech for this webinar. We have muted your microphones to ensure that everyone can hear the panel, but please ask any questions you have using the chat function on Zoom or on Facebook Live. You will find the chat function on the taskbar when you hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen. For anyone who has not used Zoom before, the chat button is the one that looks like a talk balloon. At the end of the panel discussion, we will gather up and answer questions for as long as time allows. We will be putting links to an exit survey and ways to get in contact with us on the screen at the end of the panel discussion, but you will also be able to find those links during the event in the chat room. For those of you who would like to revisit this discussion, we are streaming this event on American Friends Service Committee page through Facebook Live, and a recording will be available on the Safe and Just Michigan YouTube channel later. You can also engage with us on our social media channels or visit our websites. So this webinar provides an overview of a new white paper from the American Friends Service Committee and the Carceral State Project, I Don't Want to Die in Prison, Prison Conditions, Decarceration, and Mutual Aid in the Age of COVID-19. The report describes how deeply harmful the COVID-19 crisis has been in 29 prisons in Michigan. It is based on nearly 300 pages of firsthand accounts of conditions inside Michigan's prisons during COVID-19. COVID killed 68 mostly long-serving people and infected over 4,000 people in Michigan's prisons. It concludes that the only humane response to COVID-19 in Michigan's prisons is decarceration, and the only humane response to the crisis of incarceration itself is abolition. The report makes a series of recommendations for immediate action by the governor, the parole board, the Michigan legislature, and the Michigan Department of Corrections. A few of these key recommendations are: 1, issue an executive order to release people who are elderly, infirm, medically frail, and those receiving treatment for chronic conditions. Another recommendation is issue an executive order to release people serving time for a technical violation. Another recommendation is suspend truth in sentencing and restore good time, disciplinary credits, and earned credits. Another recommendation is instruct the parole board to calculate the parole guidelines for any person who has served 15 years in prison. Another recommendation is to instruct the parole board to release more long-serving parole-eligible people. Another recommendation is expand the parole board to 20 members to increase the capacity for parole reviews. There are several more recommendations, and if you would like to read them, please do. I believe the link will be placed into the chat box for people to be able to read the new white paper that was written by the American Friends Service Committee. And now I would like to introduce today's panelists. Our first panelist is Dr. Abdul El Sayed. He is a physician, an epidemiologist, public health expert, and progressive activist. He is the author of Healing Politics, which diagnoses our country's epidemic of insecurity and the empathy politics we will need to treat it. He is an expert in health policy and health inequalities, and he has previously served as health commissioner in the city of Detroit, where he led one of the fastest municipal public health turnarounds in American history. Please welcome Dr. Abdul El Sayed.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our second panelist is LaWanda Hollister. She is a returned citizen and a resident of Washtenaw County. She served 34 years inside of the Michigan Department of Corrections and has obtained an associate's degree in general studies and a bachelor's degree in business. She is a chef who is Serve Safe certified and has been home now for 3 months and is enjoying her freedom. Please welcome Ms. LaWanda Hollister. Our third panelist is Mr. Martin Vargas. Martin is a self-taught artist whose work is eclectic in style and media. His subject matter includes social issues, portraits, and wildlife. Martin was a juvenile lifer for 45 years and exhibited with the Prison Creative Arts Project from 1994 to 2018 when he was released. Please welcome Mr. Martin Vargas. As we go off into our panel discussion, the first question that I would like to ask to our panelists is, what brings you to an event about prison and public health? Starting with you, Dr. Abdul Saeed, could you please share with us what brings you into this space?
I want to thank all sponsors for hosting such a critical conversation. I'm really grateful to be here today because as someone who believes deeply in our government's responsibility to provide the basic means of a dignified life, public health is one of those things. And the irony when it comes to incarceration is that when our society chooses to incarcerate people, we are decidedly taking on the full breadth of responsibility to care for them. And in fact, we are failing that responsibility in a deep and profound way. So not only have we taken people's rights from them, but also we have failed to provide them the basic means of a dignified life. So if we're not thinking about mass incarceration as a public health challenge, and we're not thinking about providing for the basic means of public health in carceral situations, then we are failing our broader responsibility toward public health. And then the last point is to say that we often think about sort of jails and prisons as being their own spaces, independent of the rest of society, but that could be nowhere near the truth. And the choices that we make about how we treat people in the carceral system are choices that we are making about how we're treating people outside of it. And we have a real responsibility to face up to that. So I'm grateful to be a part of this conversation, really grateful to be in community with and learning from my co-panelists here, and really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. El Sayed. LaWanda, could you please share with us what brings you into this space?
I'm here because I was incarcerated, and during the COVID, it left me unprepared for release. And I have a real problem with that. And I would like for the people that are still there and left behind not to experience and go through the things that I went through being released after 34 years. So that's why I chose to accept it, being a part of the panel.
Thank you, LaWanda. Thank you. Martin, could you share with us a little bit about why you chose to come into this space? You have to unmute yourself, Martin.
I'm sorry, there you go. First of all, thank you for including me among the distinguished panel that I am with right now. I was asked if I would give my insight and beliefs on a very critical issue that's going on in Michigan right now, COVID running loose inside Michigan prisons. And even though I can't speak on it because I have been home now for close to 3 years, so I wasn't inside there when COVID was running loose, I am honored and grateful for being a part of this particular panel. I feel it's about time that somebody showed real interest in what's going on inside Michigan prisons.
Absolutely, and thank you, Martin. Thank all three of you for choosing and willing to be into this space. The next question that I would like to pose to our panelists is, why is prison a particularly dangerous place in the era of COVID-19? And LaWanda, you being someone who was incarcerated during COVID, could you talk to us a little bit about what your experiences were like inside of the women's facility, and what made it particularly difficult for you all during this pandemic?
Well, when it first began, it was unknown. No one knew really what it was about. We just knew it was contagious and that it was taking lives. So there was no system in place for such a pandemic. And no one had heard about COVID-19, so everything was chaotic. And preparing to leave prison, having served 34 years, they don't allow you to get the necessary re-entry things that you need until weeks before you are able to leave. And as a long-termer, I simply was not prepared to come back into society because of COVID. And I was not allowed to take any classes or anything before I was released. And people were getting sick, they were dying, they were putting sick people in with the unsick people, and everybody simply became kind of rude because we didn't know what was going on. We don't want to catch it. And all we keep hearing is social distancing. It's impossible to socially distance in prison. It was simply impossible. So they made us some little masks that they made out of our state clothes, and in an area that is supposed to house or accommodate 40 people, you have 100 and some people in there. And you want me to stay away from everybody else, and it's impossible. So they were getting in trouble for not staying in the area that they were supposed to be in. They started that 15-minute on, 15-minute off with the telephones, and that was just absurd. So we couldn't contact our family, and the cleaning system, everything was just simply chaotic. And my point is, from having been in there as a long-termer to being released, my main thing is to let people know that the people that are in prison, if they don't die in there, are going to be released. You don't want someone who has served 20, 30 years living next to you and they don't even know how to light the stove. So because of the COVID, I missed out on these opportunities of, being the training to be released back into society. I'm going to be your neighbor. And these are the things that I was concerned about. I came out, no identification, no birth certificate, and simply I'm just out here trying to learn how to pay bills and do all of this stuff, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Because I was a long-termer and put to the back burner, and then when COVID came, I wasn't even on the burner. So that was that. I hope that answers your question.
It did. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, LaWanda. Dr. El Said, could you speak to that? Why is prison such a dangerous place to be in the era of COVID-19?
Yeah, I want to just first of all offer my frustration with LaWanda, your experience, and I think what you speak to really paints the picture that all of us have to understand, which is that jails and prisons are not places that are designed to keep people distant. They are designed to keep people together. And not only that, but they have been underfunded for so long. Despite the massive expense that they are to our society, they are still underfunded because they are deciding they're intended to maintain the well-being of people. So it costs in Michigan, as of 2017, about $33,000 a year to incarcerate someone. It costs the same to send them to college. And we are making that choice every single day. And for that $33,000, it's not like they get to live a comfortable life, right? You talked about the experience having to have masks made from you from prison clothes. It's not like the bathrooms are independent, so you can go to the bathroom and know that you are protected from other folks. And so these are not places where all of the recommendations that we've made about COVID-19, wash your hands 10 times a day for 20 seconds with warm soapy water, sanitize your hands regularly, wear a mask wherever you go, stay socially distant. You can't do that. And then beyond that, right, the point that LaWanda made is a really good one, is that everybody who is in jail is at some point going to, or prison is going to be out in the community. And so, you know, in the jail circumstance in particular, where people stay on average about 2 weeks, we are literally forcing them into places where they have a higher probability of getting sick and then coming out into the world, right? And so we have to learn from this pandemic that the well-being of all of us is a function of the well-being of those of us who we don't pay enough attention to. We are as exposed to as the most exposed person. We are as vulnerable as a society as the most vulnerable person. And insofar as we have a set of institutions where we systematically put vulnerable people and then keep them vulnerable, you better believe that it's going to hurt everybody, and in particular those most vulnerable to it. So the stories that LaWanda shared are heartbreaking. All of us should be asking why it is that we live in a society where our government, our taxpayer money, goes to supporting a set of institutions that treat people like this, especially in the context of a pandemic.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Martine, I would like to pose the same question to you, but would also like to add, what are the most harmful effects of prison on public health beyond the current crisis of COVID-19?
Okay, I'll try to answer both of those questions. First of all, I agree with the previous speaker who just said that we should learn from, in so many words, the past. In 1980, in the mid 80s, 1986, 87, whenever it took place, there was HIV and AIDS. The same thing ran rampant inside prisons. Everybody was afraid. Nobody knew anything about what was going on inside there, why people were being isolated, what the effects, what the symptoms were. There was a lot of fear going on. The DOC should have learned from that particular virus that was going on, but it didn't. There was still haphazard, chaotic fear among staff with the higher ups within the DOC, and we went right back to that time and nobody knew what to do. First of all, the reason why prisons are a dangerous place is because there really is no connection to humanity, to loved ones on the outside. When you're inside and this virus, a virus that's pandemic, is going on, right now, everybody is witnessing COVID and the reaction for a few months of prisoner isolation and lack of connection. To many people inside, there are decades of isolation and lack of connection and exposure to an immense negative energy that exists 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for decades. Prisoners become angry and callous, and we adapt to that. We learn to survive by any means necessary. And in so doing, we begin to live by the unwritten laws of that particular environment. And again, in so doing, we resent laws and principles that are necessary for the good survival out here. And for the survival and living well out here, we learn to resent these laws and principles that we should live by in here. Although most prisoners do find ways to keep from falling victim to that negative energy, COVID has added yet another weak link to that chain of success that we are always trying desperately to cling to. Now there's mass confusion. It's not just the prisoners who are confused. It's also staff within the Department of Corrections. I'd like to read something really quick that I am privileged to have from a prisoner inside. He says something along the lines of three of the main questions that I have is go back to change the life law to include the long and determinate sentences, which everybody in this panel is in fact agreeing with. The next thing he says is chow hall food should be more nutritious than what they're getting away with. The lack of quality food is why they had to give so many of us vitamins when all of this went down. So the DOC acknowledges that there is a lack of nutritious food here, but what do? They give people vitamins instead of better food. And he says, and of course, all this comes down to more testing. That way you don't have those who are asymptomatic or hiding out, running among, infecting others. And I have to agree with all of this. Testing has to be continued to ensure that those that don't have the virus can be safe from the ones that do have it. Although there will always be that unsure factor of guards and staff coming in who may have that and spreading it around among the prisoners. Programming wise, he said, there's not much they can really do considering how everybody is locked down. So prisoners do understand right now that everything has to be locked down, and they accept that because they are dealing with it. We've dealt with it forever. So we know how to deal with being locked down. In regards to your second question, what are the most harmful effects of prison on public health? I have to, again, allude back to the guards. Guards are always speaking on how stressful it is to work inside a prison. They already know this. Working inside a prison, it's so stressful. Well, try living in one. Try living in one with not just the stressed out guards and unpredictable guards, but what all the other stress-inducing factors that already exist inside there. There's no consistency in the rules and how they are interpreted by the stressed out guards and staff. Add that to the isolation. Add that to the predators, the worries about families and loved ones dying, getting old and fading away from us. That is stressful. If someone dies, you can't really grieve their deaths inside there. And that's not counting the biggest worry that is running around inside there among the long-termers. Am I ever getting out? Am I going to die inside this prison? That you're talking about, that's a very harmful effect on prison and for public health, because as LaWanda said, and everybody knows, the majority of the prisoners that are inside there are going to be released at one time or another. They are going into my community, your community, everybody's community. I mean, come on, there's already enough stress going on inside there. So, with all that's going on, I have to say that there is something even bigger than COVID running around loose inside Michigan prisons. And that is fear. fear is way more prevalent than COVID is. Not everybody has COVID inside there, but everybody has fear. Everybody, staff, guards, prisoners as well, and our families out here. So how do you deal with that? You know, it's an unknown. And I think I ran a little bit more than with more than what you wanted to hear, but that's how I feel about these for two questions that you asked me.
Yes, and thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Martine. And I would like to pose that to you, Dr. El Sayed. What are the most harmful effects of prison on public health beyond the current crisis of COVID-19?
There are a number. The first is let's focus on the people who are incarcerated. We know that the healthcare that is provided is missing. It is not high quality. It is devoid of real investment in high quality mental health care, which just by the virtue of being incarcerated, the stressor of incarceration, people need, and that is missing. And then, you know, in a lot of contexts, you've got folks who are in jails and prisons who are then asked to pay for their own health care with the very little that they earn, which to me is just crazy. Again, because of the notion that in a prison or a jail, our responsibility as a society is that we've assented to taking care of all that person's full needs. So why would they have to care for their health care? The second piece, though, is also to families who have women and men, right, sisters and brothers, mothers and fathers, grandparents, uncles and aunties that are missing in action, that are not there to be able to provide for the people in their families, the people that they love and care about, and that is a real loss. And so the health consequences are not just to the people inside prisons, but to all of the people who are affected by incarceration. And that is to say nothing of the full economic consequences of having lost somebody. You know, it's just missing the love of someone you care about in your family is one thing, but then you think about the fact that how many families are missing somebody who would otherwise be able to be in the workforce and making money to provide for the well-being of their family members, right? These consequences of literally robbing individuals from a family, they have huge knock-on effects in terms of the well-being of that family, and we don't pay attention to that. And every choice we make about incarcerating somebody is about robbing that somebody from the people who love them and the people who need them. And you know, if we were to take a full public health measure of what the consequences of incarceration are, I think even the broadest cost are to the people who lose out on having that loved one in their lives, and that really is it's dire.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. El Sayed. And now I would like for us to transition into the recommendations that were made in the white paper that was written by American Friends Service Committee and the Carceral State Project. And my question to the panelists is, which of the report's recommendations are most urgent and need to be enacted immediately? LaWanda, I would like for you to chime in on that. Which of these recommendations do you feel are most urgent and need to be implemented immediately?
I would say the one that situates itself around the infirm and the sick and elderly. Can you call that can you say that for me? But
yes, it's issue an executive order to release people who are elderly, infirm, medically frail, and those receiving treatment for chronic conditions.
Absolutely. And the reason I would choose that one or say that that would be the most important is because these people are already dying. They're already dying, And as Dr. Alcee, Lord have mercy, I messed up the man's name. Dr.
El
Abdul
Sayed.
El Said
You
has
can just call me
said,
Abdul in this Hollister. It's fine.
okay, they're forced to pay part, not all, but part of their medical, and they simply don't have that money. And it makes it harder to receive the medical attention that they need, which we already know the medical attention is really not 100%, but it's all that they have. And then they're forced to pay for that, and they're not getting the treatments that they need. So that's why I believe that that would be the most important of them all, is because after having been incarcerated, most of them for a long period of time, and they've grown old in the prison, is, I mean, what more harm could the people do than, you know, what has been done? So that's why I would say that that would be the most important. And as Martine said about the fear, that is a truth if ever I heard. The fear, even I, after having served all those years, I've made it through countless, the way of life in prison. I made it through, and now it's time for me to be released. And I was actually scared to death that I was going to die before I could get out of there. And the pandemic started in March, and they didn't do the first test for people being released until May. And I was one of the group of 8. 3 of the 8 tested positive, and they had to stay. And had that been me after 34 years, that's everyone's fear. That's everyone's fear. One of those people out of the 3 are still there because they tested positive and they're sick. And of course, we don't want to release these people into society, but I mean, something else could be done so that these things don't have to happen. So the people that are already sick and ill and infirm, I believe that they should be considered first.
Thank you, Luwan. Same question to you, Dr. El Sayed. Which of the report's recommendations are most urgent and need to be enacted immediately?
Well, I agree with Mr.'s point about the critical ability to send home the infirm and the elderly, because again, you know, when we're talking about society's most vulnerable people, the fact that they have to have their healthcare behind a paywall to be able to get healthcare at all in the middle of a pandemic is a catastrophe. But I would also say that decarceration generally is really, really critical here. There are so many ways that society has failed to deal with real problems and has used policing and jails as a stopgap for all of these failures. And this pandemic has shown us what a folly that is. You know, in a circumstance, or in Chicago at one point in the pandemic, the Cook County Jail was the single biggest spreader of COVID-19 in all of Chicagoland. And that speaks to the idea that, you know, maybe it's not a great idea to pack a bunch of people together in a small place who don't actually have to be there because they're being released in a week or 2 weeks during a pandemic. But maybe it's not a good idea to do that at any time because, you know, we've got policies like money bail, which basically force people into jail because they're poor. And beyond that, right, the broader question of how many people are left languishing in prison facilities who don't need to be there, and who are there as a function of some of the other aspects of the report that you raised, truth in sentencing laws, and in policies that take away the ability to shorten someone's sentence and take them home. We've got to think about all of them systematically, but any and all efforts to get people out of jails and prisons and to keep people out of jails and prisons is policy that we need to be investing in, particularly right now. But this doesn't end when the pandemic's over, right? We shouldn't have to have a global pandemic to force us to find our humanity. This should just be what we do because it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, Dr. El Sayed. Same question to you, Martine. Which of the recommendations are most urgent and need to be enacted immediately?
Well, it seems that everybody's touching on the elderly, and I, even though I kind of agree, I have to kind of, say not really. Well, first of all, I like to say that AFSC has always been compassionate to the needs and struggles of the less fortunate based on its principles. And I believe that that's why we are here right now, because of our principles. And the report just rightly points out that the elderly and the infirmed are probably the best people to consider for release because they are the ones with the best the recidivism rate, the lowest recidivism rate. But even though the elderly and the infirmed are the ones that are most in need in there, and I'm not saying to try to stop getting anybody out, especially that particular target group. But my thing is, all of these people in there have, if they have served decades inside there, they have grown accustomed and are familiar with that environment. Is it humane to release them and put them out here in a world that they are not familiar with because of their being gone for so long? A lot of these people have no home to come home to, like we associate home to be. They have little, if any, money. They have no transportation, and they are definitely not going to get a job right about now. Is that, in fact, what we want to do with them? I mean, release, yes, but what are you going to release them to? Is that humane to throw them out here? And I'm just saying throw because that's the way I'm looking at it. You put people out here that are in their 50s or 60s and their 70s. They are not going to get a job out here. When the 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds are finding it difficult to get jobs out here right now. That's not fair. But having said that, I agree with Addendum 3 a lot on the white paper, on the report. But I would just like to add a little something to that. First of all, yes, add 5 more parole board members to the existing board. These new members should work strictly for the review of the targeted groups mentioned in this addendum, as was done under Governor Granholm once before. In addition, this 5 new board members' decisions and recommendations to the governor should be final. I don't think they should have to rely on or wait for the opinion and decisions given by the other 10 members. I feel they should just act on their own for these particular targeted groups. In addition, and under the recommended categories for commutation consideration section of this addendum, and for those of you who may not have read it, it says in part, review all people serving life without the possibility of parole who were 17 or under at the time of their crime, and so on and so on. Review all the people sentenced at age 17 or under who are serving long indeterminate sentences and have served 20 years or more. Review all the women serving life sentences and LID, parolable and non-parolable. and so forth, review all of the 807 parolable lifers who have served 20 or more years. And yes, review is great, and I encourage that, but I would have to say that you have to add something to that. You can't just say review. I have experienced countless reviews, as have many other long indeterminate people serving LIDs, parolable lifers, non-parolable lifers, and people that have done a lot of time. We go through a lot of reviews, and those reviews mean nothing because they are tucked away in a file cabinet somewhere, and then we have to wait another 5 years before we are reviewed again. So yes, I agree with these, but add a little something to that and say review and give specific reasons why these targeted groups should not be released. Give the reasons. Don't just review, because reviews mean nothing. They really don't mean nothing. They waste time, they waste money, and they don't do anything with them. So add, ask for specific reasons. And don't rely on the blanket reasons that the DOC is so good at giving out. Like, for example, based on the nature of the crime. What kind of a reason is that to deny somebody based on the nature of the crime? It was a horrible crime. Well, yeah, if you're talking about LIDs, parolable lifers, and lifers, they're going to be horrible crimes. All three of those categories, all of them are going to be horrible crimes. But each crime is different for each particular person. So be specific in your reasons why you are denying these people. Don't rely on just a review, and don't rely on just blanket responses or blanket denials. To that point, and it's going to add a little something, releasing more prisoners are going to close prisons. It's inevitable, and that's great. Yes, decarcerate. But these same prisons that are going to be empty, for lack of a better word right now, and hopefully, should be modified and repurposed. They should be opened up for the specific needs people, not labeled and not run like prisons and not funded by the DOC. People who commit property crimes can be sent to a facility, for example, that will provide educational and skills trades that when they go out of that and do their time, they have trades, they have an education, which we should all have and encourage. As Dr. El-Sayed said, education, it costs, or it may have been you, I'm sorry, I'm getting you two mixed up right now for some reason. It costs as much to incarcerate someone for life as it does to send them to college. I mean, come on, there's a very, very good, send them to college. You give them education, give them skills. Have substance abusers, people who abuse substances, people who are chronically ill and mentally ill, send them to facilities for treatment, real facilities with real therapists, real doctors, real treatment. Not to prison to walk around and go to Medlines 3 times a day to get pills to keep them sedated and not do anything else. That's not right. The elderly who have no home placement outside of homes can be sent to yet another facility that will resemble perhaps assisted living or foster care homes for the elderly and so forth, but not a prison. Don't keep them in prison. Send them somewhere where they can pass the remaining years of their life with dignity out here in the streets. But don't just release them to nothing. That's just not right.
Thank you for that, Martin. Thank you for that. And I know that Dr. El-Sayed, you have a hard stop at 5 o'clock. So I want to pose our last question to the panelists. What practices, institutions, or values do we need to enact or create in order to protect our collective well-being and safety?
For me?
Yes, Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry about that. Look, I want to reflect on just this moment, stepping back. We have seen unprecedented uprisings in the face of police brutality and mass incarceration. And, surveys suggest that about 10% of Americans hit the streets in a Black Lives Matter protest. That's unprecedented. The question is, how do we harness this moment in this movement to create real change? Because from where I sit, I don't see politicians listening the way that I believe that they need to. There is a bigger conversation here, because it's not just the depth of penetrating into the system of policing and the system of incarceration, but it's also the breadth to appreciate that when that police officer put his knee on the neck of another man for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, we got to remember that that police officer was sworn to protect the public safety. Now, this word public is a really important one, because not just that he didn't include George Floyd in what he thought of as the public. It's that he actively thought of George Floyd as something from which he needed to keep the public safe. But it's not just public safety that has excluded Black folks. It's also public health. We've got a COVID-19 pandemic that has spread 2.5 times as fast, or to 2.5 times as many per capita Black Americans and Latinx Americans versus white Americans, taken 2.5 times as many Black and brown lives than it has white lives. And so we see that Black and brown Americans aren't included in public health either. You go to Flint and ask them if Black folks feel included in public utilities, right? Something as simple as water. Poison 9,000 kids and 100,000 people. You go to any majority Black or brown school district and ask if they think that Black and brown people are included in public education, right? And then you think about even who is elected to represent us. Are they included in public service? And so these conversations have to fundamentally permeate every aspect of what we think of as being part of the public. And I think when we do that, if and when we are willing to ask ourselves about whether or not we are willing to include everybody in that public, and then force our policies and our enforcement mechanisms to meet the responsibility of truly including everybody in the public, I think at that point we will start to rethink the way we police, the system of mass incarceration, the system of public education, the system of public utilities, the system of public health, all of these things that have excluded and been designed to exclude certain groups of people for a very long time. And when we do that, I think we will start to see the kinds of practices and the kinds of reforms that will solve this problem and all of the other problems that create it. Because the last thing we have to remember is that jails and policing in America are like the duct tape that people bring out to fix all the other broken systems, right? And so if we're serious about fixing policing or rethinking policing and fixing the mass incarceration system, then we've got to fix all the broken problems that lead to them, right? Where we're then applying the duct tape that is so corrosive to the lives of so many people. And I just want to end by expressing my gratitude to both Ms. Hollister and Mr. Vargas for sharing their stories and their experiences. And I believe that we need to do so much better on this and so many other fronts. And I have to say that this should redouble all of our efforts to make sure that wherever we have influence, that we are working to fix these systems so that they include all of us, and that nobody has to go through the horrors and the fears and the mistreatments of our carceral state in this country.
Thank you for that, Dr. El Sayed. I'm aware that you definitely have a hard stop, but I'm hoping that maybe you could stay a couple minutes longer, because we do have quite a few questions. And I would like to pose one that is addressed to you in case you do have to leave at 5. And the question is, what can we as everyday citizens do to support the recommendations of the report beyond writing and calling the governor?
So, you know, as many folks know, I ran for governor in 2018, and I came to politics thinking that the best way to enact policy was in politics. I still, obviously, politics is critical to enacting policy, but what I've come to appreciate is actually that politicians don't make policy, culture makes policy. Politicians are there to just translate the culture into policy. And so moving the public conversation, especially in a time like this, I think is really important. So, you know, the fact that we're having this conversation, there are 70 folks watching here on Zoom and, you know, however many on Facebook, that's really important. But using our platforms and building the public conversation is really important too. So whether it's, you know, making a video for your social media, just talking about this issue, or writing an op-ed in the local paper, or having a conversation with your grandparents, right? All of these things matter in terms of moving the public conversation and recruiting a group of people to demand the kind of change that's demanding from the governor's office. Now, of course, you got to keep calling and you got to keep reaching out to them. You've got to force the issue, but don't forget your power as a culture maker and who's watching. And then the last thing I'll say on this front, this is a really challenging time because I think it's challenged a lot of people's hope. And the last thing I'll just say is that one has to stay hopeful. And I'm not saying the kind of hope that's born out of some naive sense of the future, but in a grounded sense of the past and a recognition that the only way that the present and the future don't replicate that past is because good people stand up to make sure it doesn't. And if there is something that I have hope in, it's that good people are standing up to make sure it doesn't. And so, you know, we've got to join our voices together and we've got to find hope in one another. And we've got to keep driving the conversation forward.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. El Sayed. I would also like to pose that same question to our panelists. And then we have probably like 5 minutes before we can go into our question and answer. So I would like to hear from you first, Martine, but if you could keep it to like a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes to allow LaWanda a brief moment to respond. Thank you. But the question to you, Martine, is what practices or institutions or values do we need to create or enact in order to protect our collective well-being and safety?
Values, I would say empathy, compassion, and understanding, not just to the prisoners though, but to the general public and to the victims as well. Because as Dr. El Sayed says, the public is very much involved here, and we should include everybody, not just people that agree with us. We should include people that disagree with us. Implementing activities like the ones PCAP has done with creative writing program, with the art lessons inside that people are signing up for right now, letter writing campaigns perhaps, from anyone in the general public that wants to participate, because there is so much loneliness inside there right now and isolation. We should include those prisoners in reaching out to them and include them and let them know that somebody cares out here. And challenges as well. Challenge the prisoners inside to create something that they want us to do out here for them. The dangers to the public is that, I believe, Dr. El Sayed spoke about politics. The politics of it all is that prosecutors, judges, and sheriffs are locally elected officials. Some of them don't want to give up their power, and we know that. They have, I mean, we need to, as Dr. El Sayed said, create good legislation because of our cultures. So voting, that's one of the biggest things that everyone out here can do this year to eliminate not just the threats of COVID, but to the threats of mass incarceration. If we really want to do something, we should vote for good, progressive thinking people and elect these people into the offices. I kept it as short as I could.
And thank you. And thank you for that. Thank you so much for that, Martine. Well said, by the way. And LaWanda, you spoke earlier about how difficult it was for you coming home due to a lack of preparation on the MDOC's behalf. So the question is the same, but I would like for you to focus specifically on like reentry and things of that nature in regards to what practices, institutions, or values do we need to enact or create in order to protect our collective well-being and safety.
Well, I do agree with Martine, and I think empathy would be the biggest, because all of the entities of the Department of Corrections work separately, and they are only concerned about their particular area, when they all need to work together so that we can move forward. The long-term prisoners, they're not afforded the opportunities to, they learn how to live in prison. They don't learn how to live outside of the prison, which they will eventually be one day. So like myself, I came home, no identification, no birth certificate, and all of the entities were separate. In order to get my birth certificate, I had to have my identification. In order to get my identification, I had to have my birth certificate. And I had neither. So these things need to try to work together so that we can move forward. That's the only way that we can overcome these things. And I only received my identification because it was mandatory that I voted. And the people got behind me and helped me move forward to get the identification so that I could vote. So those are the things that I believe are important, that the people that are serving life and long indeterminate, they need to be programmed, or they need to be able to participate in things that eventually they're going to need. They want to give you these things in the last few weeks, and then, like with myself, a pandemic happened. And so I wasn't able to receive those things. And I feel like that's part of the reentry issue, is that, in my opinion, the lifers and long indeterminate sentence people, they run the prison. They're the ones training the other people. They're doing the cooking and et cetera, so on and so forth. That's running the prison. And they're not being able to be trained to move forward.
Thank you, LaWanda.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Martine. Thank you to Dr. Abdul El Sayed, who had to leave at 5 o'clock. Thank you to all of our panelists for participating in today's webinar. And now we would like to go off into our question and answer segment. Because Dr. El Sayed has left, these questions will be for you, Martine, and for you, LaWanda. So our first question is, how is the crisis impacting employment of the incarcerated, and therefore the ability to afford co-pays, food, etc.? LaWanda or Martine, if either of you would like to take a shot at that.
Well, because they're not allowed to work, which they call details, which they don't have any details because the prison is locked down. The prisons are locked down. So they're not allowed to work. So therefore they have no income, and they're not getting any stimulus or anything like that in there. And then the family on the outside, they're not working, so they can't afford to send money. So therefore they have no ability to be able to afford the things which they were already only getting sporadically. They really have no ability to get those things now at all.
I have to agree with Lawanda. For the people that are fortunate to have somebody out here to give them a few dollars here and there when they can, it means a lot. And to go to healthcare and give up $5 every time you go to healthcare for copay, I mean, that's taken away the few dollars that they're getting from the families out here.
Absolutely.
And not everybody is fortunate to do that. But I'll give you one incident about money, involving money and stuff. This guy had COVID symptoms, and all his friends were telling him, go to healthcare, go check in, go tell them what your symptoms are. And the guy was determined that he was not going to tell anybody until he received his store. Store day is, you know, it differs among the prisons, but store day means you get the store that you ordered a week or so in the past, and now here come your goods. Well, before store day came along, because he did have COVID virus, the man died. I mean, come on. How does money impact? I mean, you die for a few dollars worth of Zuzus and Wham Whams, ramen noodles, you know, and coffee, because you're afraid that somebody's going to take your store goods, or you're not going to receive them until 4 weeks from now. It's hard to talk about that one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and thank you both for answering the question. Another question is, what are some steps that we can take to address the epidemic of fear in prison and among families with incarcerated loved ones?
Fear is the biggest factor running around inside there. How do you deal with it? What can you do for it? Again, you know, try to create something that everybody can participate in. And I know that programs are not functioning inside there. So we can't create any programs for this. But again, PCAP has in fact is involving prisoners inside there to participate in creative writing programs. Everybody inside prison can write. We should encourage them to write. Everybody should encourage them to write. I don't care if it's a poem, a short story, a fear, a dream, a bunch of babbling words, you know, cuss somebody out. It doesn't matter. Just write, you know, and communicate with somebody. You're going to get something in return. That's a good poem. That's wow, I didn't know you felt like that. Or that's a hell of a dream. Or come on, that's a stupid fear. You can do this or that. But I think they need to be engaged, because right now there is so very little engagement, and so much is going on in their minds about the fear that's going on. People outside, the families, the friends have to step up and write a letter, send a card, so that they know that somebody out here does exist for the most part, and that somebody out here does care. Get them involved, get them stimulated in any way that we can. You know, come up with something, awards, monetary or whatever, for the best poem for everybody to write, you know? I don't know. I mean, fear has to be, you know, so we have to do something to quell some of that fear inside there, to let them know that it's going to be over pretty soon, you know? And I don't mean by death. I mean, sooner or later, this will pass, and everything will not come back to normal, but it will subside and everything will be less stressful.
Yeah, thank you. And I definitely appreciate your points and your comments. And I would like to just tweak that question a bit when I pose it to you, Lawanda, because what it sounds like you're speaking to, Martine, is to subside fear, you have to inspire hope. But even with that said, Lawanda, I would like to ask you, how do we inspire hope to people inside of prisons during this pandemic moving forward?
Well, hope is the only thing that the people on the inside have. I hope something's going to be different today. I hope, there will be a change. I hope. It's the only thing that keeps people alive. But I have to agree with Martine that it's the fear, which means we need the empathy. Because if they have they can't participate in any of their religious activities. They have no activities at all. Their visits, they have no visits. The phone calls are extremely limited. And so it's extremely hard to be able to try to instill that calm in them, because they don't have anything except for social distancing, which they can't do. So that's very hard to say, and I really don't know how that would be, because even in talking to people on the phone about the COVID, you can get in trouble for that. Because why are you asking so many questions about COVID-19? Do you have this? So now they want to come in and get you and test you because you've asked these questions. So I really don't know what the answer to that would be, because I simply don't know what would allow them that calm. Right now they have nothing. And I don't see anything in their future, but I'm not a palm reader, so I don't know, but they don't have anything. So no outlets.
And the best thing to do would be to release them.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Let my people go.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, we have another question from our audience that I will pose, which both of you have already spoke to, but I definitely will pose it again. How can we provide supports for long timers when they come home during the pandemic? What specific supports do people need before release and after they come home? Again, both of you have spoken very well to this point, but please, again, would you reiterate?
I believe what I need and what I've needed since I've been home is understanding. I simply do not know. I know you told me this, how to cut the computer on, and I know you told me this, but I simply don't know. I haven't been here and grew up with that. I was a juvenile offender, so I went in at 17, and I grew up in there. I didn't have these gadgets and different things in there, and now I'm out here and I simply don't know. So I need patience and understanding, and I need for you not to feel like I should know that. I simply don't. I thought I paid my telephone bill. I really truly thought I paid my telephone bill. I did all the steps that were shown, and when I was with the youth juvenile, the group on
Youth
a camping
Justice
trip.
Fund?
Yeah, the Youth Justice Fund, a camping trip, they cut my telephone off. And they said I didn't pay the bill. What? I did pay the bill. But I just simply don't have these things enriched in me as you do. So I need for you to be patient and to understand that I just, I'll get it. I'm not slow, maybe I am slow, but I'm not retarded. So that's, I just be patient. Be patient. Have a little understanding. Yeah.
Thank you, LaWanda.
Yeah.
Martine, would you care to address how we can provide supports for long timers when they come home during this pandemic, and what specific supports do people need before release and after they come home?
I was laughing when LaWanda was talking because I know some of those things personally as well. So you're not alone there, girl. But things that they need, I mean, you can put me in any prison anywhere and I will know how to survive in those prisons because I know that. I know that world. You put me out here and I'm going to stumble and crawl and get lost. Getting lost, I get lost a lot. I don't mind it because I have the opportunity to travel. So I don't mind getting lost. I'll find my way back. It's a journey. It's fun. But what do you prepare? What do you give them to prepare? Let them know that what they think is going to happen is not. There are so many other factors that are going to take place. There are so many other things that are going to take place. The best thing they can do, though, I don't care who you are, the best thing you can do is prepare yourself. Communicate with people out here in the streets. I don't care who they are, friends, neighbors, enemies, priests, who, I don't care. It doesn't matter. Just communicate, because when you come out here, you have to understand that there is a community out here that you have no idea exists. You can walk down the streets, which I do a lot. Walking down the streets and people wave at me, they say hi, they this and that, they smile. This is all new because that doesn't happen inside. People don't wave and say hi, how you doing, or how are you? It is an amazing trip to get into and to get used to, because you don't expect people to welcome you with open arms and treat you like a normal human being, which we are not in that abnormal environment of prison. We get so adjusted and accustomed to that, that coming out here and doing normal things that you and everybody else does, they're not normal to us, as LaWanda alluded to. Going in the kitchen and grabbing a knife, to cut slice some bread with, or cut some tomatoes with, that's, I mean, in prison, you can't even look at a knife, much less hold one and use it for whatever. So there's a lot of things that you have to get used to. But in preparing, prepare yourself intellectually, prepare yourself through communicating, communicate with people, connect with people, because that is going to be the most important thing to do, to be able to speak to strangers and tell them, first of all, hey, look, I was recently released from prison. If that's going to bother you, then we won't talk. But you have to be willing to say this, be upfront, be truthful, be honest, and people will accept you with open arms, because that has been my experience. Yes, like LaWanda said, the phone bill. You have to get in your head, make lists if you have to, of things that you will probably have to have out here. Phones, electronic, technological assistance, housing assistance, all things that you are not familiar with if you didn't experience them, if you did not experience them when you were in the streets. Because like LaWanda, I was 17 years old too when I went in. If you're a teenager when you go in and you come out in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, you're going to have to learn that you are not a teenager anymore, and you're going to have to learn so many things that you have not experienced because you were in prison.
Yes.
God, I wish I could know the real answer to that question.
I think the answers that you both gave will suffice, and we appreciate your feedback and responses. We have, I believe, time for maybe one, maybe two more questions. I will ask this one to you both. And the question is, so often the mainstream meaning of public health generally only applies to people on the outside. How do we change that definition in the public narrative?
Ooh. I don't think I understand that.
Yeah.
I think the question speaks to how, as Dr. Abdul El Said spoke to, when the officer had his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes, over 8 minutes, his job was to protect the public, but in a sense, what he did was look at George Floyd as a threat to the public, because he was perhaps Black. So the question is, like, how do we change that narrative in the public eye to include people who are currently incarcerated as well as formerly incarcerated when we are addressing public health? So how do we incorporate people who are currently and formerly incarcerated into the public health conversation? How do we change that narrative?
I would say socialization, because they try so hard to set us apart from society that they don't realize that they're there to help us move forward and to be able to survive in society. And because that socialization is not there, then we come out and we can't socialize. Just like Martine said, it's hard for us to reintegrate into society because we don't have that socialization. We don't have those skills. And I know that this is maybe a little offbeat, but when he said people are speaking to him, et cetera, so on and so forth, I'm walking up the street and I have people to wave and speak and stop. And I had to ask my friend, do they think I'm prostituting? Why is all these people? I mean, so what is going on? But I don't have those skills that normal people that they have. So someone speaks to me and I think that, they think I'm prostitute. So we have to try to get people out of that so that I can freely speak in return and, we be as one instead of separate entities. That's the only thing I can see is socialization. They have all the prisoners set aside. They never want them to talk to the guests or the visitors or anybody. And these are the things that they need.
I have to agree with that, Luanda. I mean, social skills is something that, because I used to fear, one of my fears was that I was socially stunted. I don't know how to communicate with people out here, doctors, nurses, policemen, whoever, neighbors, but I had to learn how to do that. I wanted to learn how to do that. I wanted to talk to the woman walking her dog down the street, or the man, I had to go and borrow something from a neighbor's house or something to help me do some work around the house. But I had to go out and I had to learn. I had to realize that, I'm just another person out here to them. They don't know I'm a prisoner. Social skills are probably the most important thing that we need to learn inside that nobody teaches us. Because as you said, we can't talk to guards like they're human, or they can't talk to us like we're human, because then there would be that, what do you call that? What's that term you can get a ticket for?
Familiarity.
Over
Yes,
familiarity.
over familiarity, exactly. You can't say, hello, how are you? How have you been? How, how's your family? How's your dog? Whatever. Oh, you're getting overly familiar, and you get a write-up, and then that goes against you when you go see the parole board. That's stunting social growth. When you come in prison as a 17-year-old, as a 20-year-old, whatever, 21, 22, and you are told that you can't talk to a guard, well, you're going to learn to not talk to anybody except prisoners. And I mean, that does not work. We have to be able to communicate, as we're doing now, with anybody and everybody, or else we'll come out being suspicious of everybody and anybody. And I don't know. Personally, I like people. I don't mind going outside and kicking it with whoever it is. If they look me in the eye, I'm talking. If they don't look at me in the eye, then they don't want to talk. So I leave, just keep on stepping. But in regards to the medical profession, the healthcare, we have to be able to communicate our health issues. When I first came home, I didn't know that I had as many health issues as I, ended up having. I needed new glasses. I needed new ears. I needed dental work. I needed, I didn't know it, but I was tore up from the floor up, as they say. But I got fixed. I got well. I got better. Because I had to learn how to talk to people, and I am so fortunate to have people in my life that care about me and love me so much that they can teach me these things. I am fortunate beyond any dream that I could have had. But there are people inside here who don't have those things. They aren't as fortunate. So I feel for them, but I can't reach them. And I just hope that they really, really learn how to communicate and go out and learn how to communicate with people. But how do you get the healthcare people out here they're not looking at us as if we're criminals and prisoners. They don't know we are unless we tell them. So we should just ease up on that, paranoia that we have and just talk to people like we want to be talked to.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Martine. Thank you, LaWanda. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. Please do us a favor, and as we close out this webinar, please answer our exit survey, which will be included in the chat box. Just give us some feedback so we can help just with our logistics and our webinars moving forward. American Friends Service Committee, the Carceral State Project, the Prison Creative Arts Project, and Safe and Just Michigan, thank you for participating in today's events. On the screen, we have included several ways that you can keep in contact with all of our co-sponsors, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. Again, thank you to our panelists, and thanks again for everyone participating in today's panel. Peace and love to you all. Thank you.